Do you remember the last time you had to tackle a challenging, maybe even confronting situation? Perhaps you had to talk to someone about something that had upset you. Maybe you had to deliver a speech. Whatever the situation was, can you think about how you mustered up the guts to tackle it? What did you do? Our next guest has had to face some extremely challenging and confronting situations as a journalist in Baghdad and then in life after returning home. Dean Yates has had his share of tough situations to face. He joins us now to talk about how he gathered the guts to get through it all and what he observed in the people he was working with. G'day, Dean. How are you doing?
I'm all right, Joel. And yourself?
Oh, terrific, thank you. Look, when you think of having real guts, what does that mean to you?
Yeah, well, look, it's an interesting one, Joel, and I'm not sure that, and I'm going to be straight up with you, I'm not sure I really like the idea of implying that people need guts for overcoming things, sheer force of will. And look, I had to go through some pretty harrowing circumstances in my journalistic career, and then afterwards trying to overcome the trauma that I encountered. And trauma doesn't let you do that, right? It takes control. And for me, it was all about the support that I got from my family, my friends, and an amazing treating team. And so it was what really helped me wasn't so much guts, but curiosity and what was happening with me, what was going on, and why was I struggling so much with my mental health.
Now, I'm a journalist, Dean, in a way, and honestly, my life is pretty easy. I live in Hobart. Our biggest stress is arguing about a stadium until our government disintegrates. What sort of stresses were you and your people facing in the Middle East?
Yeah, look, so when I was the bureau chief in Baghdad, for example, for Reuters, the international news agency, it was the height of the Iraq War. I was responsible for about 100 people. This was the violence was unimaginable. Car bombs going off every day. Our office was located in what was called the red zone. At any time, insurgents could have come in and overrun us, and that was just the day to day. But what was really stressful for me was the safety of our staff. And sadly, in 2007, 2 of my staff were killed in a U.S. airstrike, an attack by a U.S. helicopter. That was then, that footage became infamous a couple of years later when it was published by WikiLeaks, by Julian Assange, and it was called Collateral Murder. So for me, that was covering a war like Iraq was stress on a day-to-day basis. But then there were also other things as a journalist that I covered, like the Bali bombings, the Boxing Day tsunami. And that accumulated over many years with the result that by the time I moved from Asia and the Middle East with my family back to Tasmania, a few years later I was in a psych ward. I was suicidal. It had just built up too much, and I needed help.
We will certainly talk a little bit about that trauma and about what it took to get you through that, Dean Yates. I'm really interested in that. But I just want to say, when I talk about guts, what I'm talking about is what allowed you to move to the Middle East in the first place, to even exist as a reporter in a war zone. What was that? What gave you the bravery to actually face being a journalist where there are bullets flying?
Yeah, no, it's a good question, John. I understand where you're coming from. Look, I guess it was a couple of things. As a young man, I backpacked around Europe after the fall of the Berlin Wall. I'd finished university, and I was just overwhelmed by witnessing history going through the former Eastern Europe and Russia and so on. And I just thought, this is what I want to do for the rest of my life. I want to be a journalist. I want to be at the forefront of historic events and try and make sense of that to the rest of the world. And so that was where the origins of I got the sense that was what I wanted to do. But to be honest, I got the courage from my wife, who herself was a journalist, Tasmanian journalist, called Mary Binks, who used to work at the ABC Radio probably before your time. But she had been doing some really courageous reporting in Asia. And I saw what she was doing, and it inspired me. And I thought, I want to be like my wife. And so then I started putting my hand up for assignments in places like Iraq and Gaza and so on. And I got those assignments and probably got a bit more than I bargained for.
It certainly sounds like you did, because, guts will only take you so far. Trauma will have its way, won't it? When did it first start expressing itself to you and actually giving you that trouble?
Well, it actually started pretty early on, but I just didn't see the signs, and nor did Mary, actually. I mean, literally within a week after the Bali bombings, I was going emotionally numb. But we didn't know that. This was more than 20 years ago. Journalists had no idea what PTSD was. We just got on with the job, or we drank, and we covered the next story. It was really only when we moved our family back to Tasmania, and here I was living in the peace and quiet of Evandale, and that change of pace, the change of setting, allowed all these memories and all this accumulated trauma to surface, and then it just started to come out, and I started to get the classic PTSD symptoms, the hypervigilance, the nightmares, that sort of thing, to the point where Mary realised that I was really unwell and needed help in a psych ward.
Yeah, once you feel safe, physically safe, suddenly all of those cracks open up, don't they?
And that's the interesting thing, because you go through this sort of period of denial, because I was saying to myself, how can I be feeling this way when I'm not in a war zone? There can't be anything wrong with me, because I am physically safe. But then this is what happens to people who come to our country, say, as refugees we expect them to be able to just assimilate and get on with life, but they bring that war with them because it's still in their bodies.
You are listening to Afternoons with Joel Rheinberger on 936 ABC Radio Hobart and ABC Northern Tasmania. Former Reuters journalist Dean Yates is with us, who has literally been through the wars, has covered any number of conflicts and bombings and all sorts of traumatic things, and the trauma eventually caught up with him. And then you kind of need a new type of bravery, Dean, the ability to actually say, I need help, which is not something encouraged amongst journalists of your age and stage, and not something encouraged amongst men very often as well.
Well, that's exactly right, Joel. I was just going to say, I was going to add men if you didn't mention that. And I think that is absolutely true. And Mary was trying to get me to seek help. She knew I was unwell, but there was something about it. It felt like I felt like my masculinity was being questioned almost, when in fact this was exactly what I needed. And so when I talk about mental health and I talk about my own traumatic pathway, I really try to reach out to men and say that this is absolutely, it's a good thing that if you are struggling, to seek help. It's not weakness, it's actually strength to do so. But it's getting over that first hurdle. And yeah, there is a bit of courage in that, I think, Joel. And that's probably where, if you want to talk about guts, that's where the courage comes from, is in putting your hand up and saying, I need help. And look, to be honest with you, probably one of the most, I guess, courageous things I've ever done was to step through the door of that psych ward. The first, I had 3 admissions. To actually go through that door was harder than driving into Baghdad at the height of the Iraq War.
If this is bringing up any issues for you, I'd like to point you to a fantastic first line of help, which is Lifeline, 13 11 14. That is 13 11 14. If you're feeling this way as well, if you're feeling trauma catch up with you, have a chat to Lifeline. They are always available to you, and they can also help send you in the next direction, find you the next step of things help that you need. So what was it like, Dean Yates, that first day in a psych unit? A bit surreal?
Well, it was the thing about going into a psych ward. So I had to go to Melbourne. I went to a specialised PTSD unit called Ward 17 that it deals essentially with a lot of veterans, a lot of first responders, and so you're crossing a line basically. You know that once you walk through that door, that I knew my career as a journalist was over, because I just couldn't go back and do the sort of work that I'd been doing. But I also knew that it was going to be, hopefully for me anyway, and it was, a pathway to recovery. But what I found in there was this amazing, it was like I was welcomed into this place by all these coppers and veterans as if I was one of them. I was like a family member. And what I discovered in there was it didn't matter what your trauma had been on the outside. Everyone had PTSD. Everyone was going through the same problems. Everyone had issues with their relationships. And being in there made me realize that I wasn't alone. And I can't tell you how important that was. It was really validating. And so that first psych ward admission in 2016 for me was a real turning point.
You also separate yourself from between PTSD and moral injury as being slightly different things. What are they? How are they different to each other?
Yeah, so PTSD, I think, is a lot of people would be familiar with PTSD. It's the classic trauma injury, and I sort of liken it to it's where someone has been through a life-threatening situation. Their life might have been threatened, sexual assault, rape, these horrendous events, for example. Moral injury is the moral dimension of a traumatic event. And so where PTSD can be described as a racing heart, moral injury is a broken heart. And so moral injury occurs when someone has done something, failed to do something, or witnessed something that so contravenes their moral compass that it causes a psychological injury. And in my case, it was failing to protect my staff in Baghdad, those two men who were killed. That was the moral dimension of that traumatic event for me.
Did you eventually come to grips with that they were doing a job and there was no way you could have saved them?
Well, the way I came to grips with it was actually with the help of a spiritual care worker at the psych ward in Melbourne. And I sort of, in the end, I forgave myself. It wasn't about weighing up what could have happened or should have happened. It was more about forgiving myself for not, in my own view, carrying out my duty as the bureau chief. And so rather than trying to work out what I could have or should have done, it was trying to basically coming to terms with it and accepting it that it had happened, and then forgiving myself. And I did, and I needed essentially a chaplain, spiritual care worker to help with that, and had a service for those two men on the 10th anniversary of their deaths. That was the reason I was in the psych ward. This was the second admission I had, and a weight lifted when I had that service. And I'm not a religious person. People wouldn't consider me as very spiritual, but I found that ceremony, that service that I had in this chapel near the psych ward to be really powerful, and it just made all the difference.
Yeah, human rituals are there for a reason, and we have surprisingly few of them left in the world. We have births, deaths and marriages and the grand final, and that's about it. So sometimes a ritual can be exactly what you need to say goodbye. Dean Yates, former journalist, lovely to talk to you today. Thank you so much for being with us.
You too, Joel.